G'day and welcome to the second episode of Practical Powerlifting. Today I speak with Jamie Smith, and boy is it a doozy. You can tell by the podcast length, over an hour and a half of awesome conversation. Jamie is the owner and coach and director of Melbourne Strength Culture, which you probably are familiar with already. And we go into some awesome conversation topics. He tells me a lot about his biopsychosocial model and how he applies that in a practical setting with his actual clients. He does a great job of discerning the differences between, or prioritizing, I should say, the minutia between different training variables and what you should actually be focusing on and what's actually worth tracking and measuring and understanding. He has such an interesting zoomed out lens and understanding of human movement and human exercise and training and powerlifting and strength training in general. Although he doesn't identify as a specific powerlifting coach these days, he has a very long and extensive background in powerlifting and strength training. So it's an awesome conversation, and I really do hope that you get a lot out of it, because I know I learned a lot, even as much as I know about Jamie, and we've grown up together. I mentioned it in the early part of the podcast. But I felt like I learned a lot in this hour and a half, and I really hope you do too. So enjoy the episode. I mean, yeah, like I said, I was looking forward to speaking to you because, we've known each other for so freaking long. And even, in speaking to you beforehand, you often like to credit me with some of your development, which I think is very flattering. We started at a very similar time, I suppose, like 12 or 13 years ago. But
What year was that? 20.
13, maybe?
Yeah.
I think we finished school at the same time. Maybe 2010. Did you finish 2010?
Yeah, I finished 2010. Yeah.
Yeah, so like basically the same age, same cohort and stuff. And like, in many ways, it's like I was mentioning to you before we hit record that many of our peers are like diverging, but in some ways, like we were from different worlds and we converged in some ways. So it was kind of interesting how that kind of happened. But you're a coach who I respect significantly because of your experience and because of like how you kind of got to where you were. Do you want to, I presume a lot of people listening to this already know who you are, but give us like the 45-second summary of like who you are, what you do, and how you kind of came to be Jamie Smith.
The cliff notes.
Yeah.
Well, firstly, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I've just always been a coach. I started personal training pretty young, 29. I was 19 at the time. Just started personal training, moving into the direction of strength and conditioning for athletic development. Did some internships. Got a couple of small roles in my early days when I was studying, and then began to transition to more just like strength training, and that's where I kind of crossed paths with you. And then you got me into powerlifting initially as just an athlete, just lifting, and did I think it was a junior oceanics we did, and I hurt my back, and you coached me through that period, and then just slowly over time just lent more into the powerlifting world. Obviously opened a gym, which has gone through different phases of sort of like our focus, but the central direction of our gyms has always just been like strength performance, like building strength, building confidence. Powerlifting is obviously part of that, but it's not the sole focus of it. And now I'm 33, a new dad, and still just working my way through it all.
It's funny you use the word just, like as if it's to diminish what you do, but obviously what you do is, awesome work, and it's your career and it's what you've been doing. I like that you use the term always been a coach, because that's how I identify as well. Like I often make jokes that I've never had a real job. I've never done anything, I've never sat in an office and I've never sent emails, and I didn't have this epiphany, which a lot of people do. I'm sure a lot of the clients you've worked with and other coaches you've worked with had this epiphany. They're in uni or they had a dead end job that they didn't like, and then they have this, realization at age 27 or 45 or whatever it is, I'm going to go into fitness. Whereas for you and I, that's the only thing we've ever known.
It's just what we've been doing.
And it's kind of like becomes your identity. And it's, especially in these formative years of like coming straight out of uni and into early adulthood, it's like the only thing you know is fitness, and the only thing you know how to do is coach people.
Yeah, that's all it is. That's all I've ever done. I make the same joke. I don't have a real job. Sometimes I joke when I leave home and go to say to my daughter, like, "Oh, I'm going to work now. Believe it or not, Dad does actually work." Like, just like little things like that. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't speak down about our our jobs,
Our professions. Yeah, exactly. Especially when you're trying to mentor people towards it.
Yeah, I've put a lot of time and effort into into what I've done. So, yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, and I guess like the big thing that you have is Melbourne Strength Culture, right, which is your gym, and I guess it's like probably a good starting point is, you're a personal trainer, S&C coach, got into powerlifting, and what was the transition like, opening your gym? Because, that's a big step that I think a lot of people want to do. And was that just like a natural progression, or was that something that was like always part of the plan?
I wouldn't say it was always part of the plan. The feeling, obviously, like in our industry, and maybe there might be external people that are not working within the industry that are listening to this. Obviously, I would expect there to be a bunch of coaches too. But for people that don't have the context, within our industry, especially in Australia, generally there aren't many like paid roles, like paid jobs. You can't just like go and find a job. You're kind of always working for yourself in some capacity. There definitely are more of them now. But when I was personal training, I was always working for myself, just renting space out of a couple of gyms and studios that I worked at. So like there was always this undertone of like I've got to find my own business and find my own clients and build my own systems and do all of those sort of things. So I think the natural progression of that for certain people is just that, oh, well, at some point I'll probably open my own gym and have other people working around me. It was never a focus, but it was always kind of like a thought in the background. I actually did an internship in 2016 in America, which was at Cressy Sports Performance, which was a strength and conditioning facility that works with elite baseballers, or not just elite, but baseball focus, heavily baseball focus. And when I did that internship, that was in Massachusetts. When I did that, I realized pretty quickly like what the potential of having a space, but not just having a space, like having a direction, having a community, having a strong staff sort of around that, and like building a brand, building a model, like an idea set, a programming, a client management, or whatever you want to call it, model to work towards, and everyone's building in the same direction. I saw the benefits of that when I was over there, and I was like, I think this is probably what I want to set up when I get home. And then the decision was, I'll start a gym. I never expected it to sort of get to where it was, and we've had phases of like big impact, or what I perceive to be really big impact in the industry, and then other phases of like maybe we aren't doing the right things here, and it ebbs and flows. Probably just an extrapolation of my me as a person, I guess, more than anything. But for the most part, yeah, I can't remember the exact question, but it was never like the direct goal. But once it started building, I was like, this is fucking mad. I love this.
Yeah, you mentioned your internship that you did in the US, and one thing that's always struck me about you, especially from the early days that we knew each other, was that you were thirsty for education. Like as a young adult, like as a young, personal trainer, coach, whatever, you studied formally, but you went and did these internships, you sought out professionals in the industry, you really had a thirst for knowledge. And I think that really comes across in your early days, even now, I suppose, like in your work, right? You've got what's it called? Your training model education.
Yeah.
You really, really put a premium on knowledge and understanding and theory and I guess and science, I suppose.
Yeah, I think there's two reasons for that. The first one is especially anatomy. I just love anatomy. I don't know what it is. I've always just enjoyed learning about anatomy and movement and biomechanics and all of those sort of, like that is, if I was to like hold like what is my true passion, I don't know why, but that's just what it is. And a lot of my own learning and development has been to answer questions that I have just myself, and then when I learn more, I'm able to apply it better and help more people and increase my value as a coach or as an educator. So that's one. But then the other one is just by nature of being in the gym industry, and because I've put so much importance on my own education, I've always wanted to develop education processes. And it just started with internships, me running them at the gym with a couple of students that were just training at the gym, students of a university that needed to do their hours. And it just like organically just propagated from that, running internships, then running little workshops and seminars, and then through COVID, it transitioned pretty aggressively to online development stuff. And then when we moved our facility, I wanted a space that I could have a classroom and run these sort of things. Like I've always had this, like, because of my thirst for knowledge, like I've always really enjoyed then helping other people understand those things as well. So it's kind of twofold. Part of it is just for me to learn myself because I've got these like interesting things that I think about, but then, or at least I find them interesting. But then the other part is I just really like helping coaches, and helping the person that I was back then, I guess, is kind of, it's very cliche, but it's definitely a focus of mine. Yeah. And to be
Yeah.
honest with you, it's something that I want to move more and more and more in the direction of.
Yeah, so tell me quickly about what it is that you're doing now and like your, I guess like the big project that you're working on now, which is your training model. Just quickly give us a plug on that and what that's all about and why that's kind of come about.
Yeah, so in throughout the COVID years, like I was running internships and workshops prior to COVID.
A bit more ad hoc though, right? Like kind of, I
Yeah,
mean, there was a
there
bit
was
of a
no,
system, but
they were kind of like 3 hour like squat and dead workshops and stuff. And then I had the idea to run an online just mentorship and just see how it goes. And it just happened to coincide with all of the gym lockdowns across obviously the world, but aggressively across Australia. And the first call for intake one of the online mentorship was actually the first day that the gyms locked down. They were just like completely, and I remember I was sitting in this call, and I think there was like 20 something people in the mentorship. I was sitting in this call, and I was like, oh, I've got all these planned notes to discuss, but like, what are we doing? Like, how are we going to manage this? Like, everyone's gyms were shut. Everyone was like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, what's going on? I thought I was going to lose my business. And I was like, and then just by nature of going through that, I kind of became like this, like the group just became this, obviously like everyone, like, how are we managing this? But I kind of became like a mentor outside of just like learning biomechanics or learning movement. It was, I don't know, it just organically, and I kind of liked it. I was like, oh, people actually respect my ideas and asking for my input. And I was doing a lot of one-on-one calls back then as well. So it kind of just like started building, and I pushed it pretty aggressively just because there was nothing else to do in the lockdowns. I was just like, well, I'll just run another one. And I ended up running 3 or 4 of them over that 18-month period. And they were all, I believe, some like really successful, and some of those people are still very heavily connected with me. And then I was like, all right, maybe there is something to this. And then the gym reopened and started building. We moved our facility, and I was like, oh, I've got this thing in the background. I'll just let it sort of simmer for a bit. And it probably for 18 months after we reopened, it wasn't a big focus. And then I actually became a dad 18 months ago, like the start of last year. And just in that period, for anyone that has become a new parent, father, mother, it just makes you think. The future becomes a lot more like, what am I doing? Up until that point, I was very much just like, take it as it goes and not really like thinking too much. Like I was always happy with where I was at, but I don't know, those thoughts just start to propagate more. And I was actually seeing a psychologist at the time, just from just a combination of all the stress and stuff I was feeling, and I don't think I was doing a great job managing. And eventually we started just chatting about like, what are the things that light my fire the most? And it always just came back to education, like helping other coaches. Like that is when I get off a one-on-one mentoring call, I'm lit up. I'm excited. I could do back to back to back to back and feel really like energized. Other parts of my job, just because the nature of it, I feel not anxiety, but I feel like I avoid things and I do all of those sort of things. So, the focus over the last couple of years has just simply been to focus more on the things that fill my cup up. And by expression of that, it's like, well, how do I make this education mentoring side of things a little bit more of a dominant part of my work? So I decided to split it away from strength culture so that it doesn't muddy the water of what Melbourne strength culture is. It's my own thing. So that's why I rebranded it as training model. And I've been in the process now of developing online mentorships for it. I've got like an ongoing group one. I've got a couple of like products and stuff with there, but I'm in the process of like building out a strong sort of framework to work with it all in. So that's how I kind of got to where I'm at now. Yeah.
no, that's awesome. So it sounds like, I mean, I kind of knew this already, but hearing you kind of explain all of that sounds like there was a chapter of your adult working life where you heavily identified as a coach, like, especially in the early days of MSc, you're pumping out content online, theoretical stuff on your YouTube channel, you're still educating, ironically, actually, when I think about it, it is education, but you're coaching lifters, you're bringing lifters to good comps, you're going to nationals. And then in the last more recent chapters, it's becoming less coaching. Like, do you still call yourself a coach?
Yeah. I still definitely identify as a coach. Absolutely. I still coach a small group of clients. At its peak though, like 80% of my week was dealing with clients and dealing with athletes and all of that. Right now,
Running programs and reviewing training videos, dealing with people in real life.
Yeah, right. and I don't see it ever going back to that point. Like right now, I'm very selective with who I work with in terms of those like coach client sort of stuff. Um, so yeah, it's not so much that I've like de-identified as a coach. It's just not my main thing anymore. And it was a bit of a challenge, to be honest with you, to work through that. That was part of my like initial stint with the psychologist, was to like challenge some of these like identity beliefs that I had, because I felt a bit of like and I put it in your form because JP sent me John. I just saw your name at the bottom. Yeah, I don't know why I called you John.
You just kept
JP,
going instead of John Paul. It would have been
John at the
chill.
bottom. JP sent me he sent me a form at the start, and it was like one of the things was like, what I don't. One of the answers I put in there was like, I don't identify as a powerlifting coach anymore, which is funny because I'm on a powerlifting podcast and I own a powerlifting gym. Like that was a challenge for me to get through that feeling of like, this is not, it's just not who I am anymore. Like I did like 7 or 8 years of like powerlifting. But then eventually I realized that I just like strength training. I like the processes around strength training. And one expression of that is powerlifting, which is great. And I can help those people and educate around those things, but it's not the be all and end all of the ideas that I like to discuss and the value that I think I can create. So the gym is still like heavily powerlifting, but for me, myself, it's just not a huge focus anymore.
I want to jump to some more like actual heavier stuff, not heavier, but deeper stuff. I'm going to deep dive into some coaching related stuff, the way that you go about doing things. But I want to quickly stay on this point because I do think it's interesting. And I feel like as an outsider, like watching your life, online, and we chat, but not with a great amount of frequency, especially anymore. I feel like there might have been a period where you might have been in denial about this shift in your identity, where you almost want to cling on to, no, but I'm still a powerlifting guy and I'm in powerlifting. But I could see that there was a disconnect. You weren't doing comps anymore. You kind of lost interest. You tried to get interested again. You did do a couple of comps after a couple of years break, but then
Yeah.
clearly that didn't light a fire because you didn't keep doing them. Like, was that like a tough few years? Am I right in saying that, or am I totally uncalled for? And
No, I think that's a pretty accurate sort of view of it. I think the biggest challenge for me has always been that I own a powerlifting gym. So
yeah,
sometimes I feel like I used to feel this. I don't feel it anymore. But if I move if I move too far away from that direction, that identity, that in some way I would damage what I've built. Where as I've matured, what I've realized is that business, even though it's its own objective thing, it is so much just influenced by the people that are in it. And regardless of me outwardly saying I'm no longer that interested in powerlifting, that influence is still happening. Like I'm not really at comps. I'm not really handling clients like powerlifting clients. Like the influence was probably already there. So maybe other people would have seen that and experienced that. But I don't know, maybe it just took me a little bit longer to sort of just recognize that it is okay for my interest to change, and it's not going to burn the whole thing down, and it's good. We'll be fine. So yeah, I think you're pretty accurate in saying that.
all right. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, one of the reasons that I was so keen to speak to you, like we've been speaking about this whole time, is you've got a very strong theoretical understanding, and I would say you're probably one of the most you've got one of the best understandings of human movement, of training, of adaptation, of programming, of anyone, I suppose, in our industry in Australia. But then when I'm going through, you mentioned a few of the questions I had for you beforehand, and I asked about your coaching philosophy. And one of the things that you said was, a bigger focus on zooming out when making decisions, and a bias towards the subjective experience within training and work. Can you elaborate on how this has come about? Because I mean, just to elaborate myself, where this project for me, this podcast came from, practical powerlifting, is there was a period where I was also so obsessed with biomechanics and anatomy and how people moved and stuff. And as I matured and as I gained experience and I dealt with real people in real life, you realize it almost doesn't fucking matter exactly what angle their hips should be at when they don't even come to the gym. Like they're supposed to be coming 3 days a week and they come once a week or once a fortnight. And so I presume that's kind of related to this answer of yours, zooming out. But in your own words, what's that in terms of your coaching philosophy?
Yeah.
And funny enough, it's not even your coaching philosophy because you're not doing as much coaching. I guess it's almost like the philosophy you're probably imparting on some of your students.
Yeah, it's just something that I just view. I view all of these ideas like I have through the psychologist process, we worked out that there's some autistic flares within my my psyche. I have a very
No
I
offense,
don't
but
know.
not surprising.
Yeah, I have a very I like models. I like
Mm.
frameworks. I like really finding the connection between different principles and ideas. I like boiling things down. I feel like I have a strength in viewing things very objectively, but then also viewing it within a context. Like, I don't know what it is about me, but and a lot of the feedback I get from coaches who have done my sort of things say that my process in education actually offers a lot of clarity and it removes a lot of this confusion because I don't know, just the way that I view and think about things, it seems to just make make sense of all of these what people think to be conflicting ideas, but ultimately they're not. And I kind of have two layers when I think about anything within like the coaching experience or the coaching process, but also just life in general. And I view them as a lens. And when I think of a lens, it's like something that you can put on your face, like a set of sunglasses that taints the information coming in.
Like
It
filters it a
colors
little
the
bit.
information coming in.
Mm.
An example of a lens, I believe, is the BPS model. Once you learn the foundational ideas of the BPS model, it is a set of sunglasses that you can put on and observe the information coming in from, and it changes the way in which you perceive that. So when I think of like the subjectivity, when I started really learning about that sort of stuff and really starting to understand that, it stemmed from the BPS model, which for people that are maybe not aware of it, it's just a more sort of like global view of the influences that shape the human experience. The
Yeah, and
B is bio,
just to
yeah,
clarify, BPS biopsychosocial model. So the merging or the interplay of biology, psychology, and
and
social
social
influences
environmental.
in your training, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's not just training; it's just life in
Yeah,
general.
life.
So
Yeah.
that, yeah, the way that I think about it is a human has the hardware; it's their physical body. That's the obvious stuff. I view that as the objective reality. That's the objective. You view it. You view someone squat, and you can see what's going on. You observe it. You can label it. You can describe it, and the objectivity of just life experience. Then there's this subjectivity, which is the psychological variables and factors, and that's going to be all of your past experiences, your expectations, your beliefs, your fears, your childhood,
Trauma,
trauma, all of this sort of stuff, both
relationship. Yeah.
positively and negatively, the way you view yourself, the way you view relationships, and all of these sort of things. Like, it's this psychological, I call it the software of a human. And then you've got
Mm.
the environment that objective reality and that subjective reality is functioning within, and the environment is constantly influencing and impacting all of it all at once. And I first got exposed to this within the rehab space because I like learning about rehab and all of those sort of things. But once I started to learn more about it and realize it and use this lens to view things, all of a sudden, it kind of, it's not nihilistic, but it can definitely lead down that path to where it's like none of this objective stuff really matters if the human experience, the subjective stuff, isn't in the direction that we want it to be. And a classic example to tie this to something that's contextual to powerlifting would be that how many times have you coached a client who objectively has gotten stronger? They are objectively in a better position, but they go to a comp and they get pantsed by their competition, or they didn't hit the PR that they thought they were going to get. They still hit a PR, but they thought they were going to get a 20 kilo deadlift PR, and then they got a 12.5 kilo deadlift PR, and they feel let down. They feel like they have somewhat failed in their expression. Conversely, how many times have you gone through a coaching process and somebody objectively hasn't got stronger, but they feel better about themselves? They feel more confident in the process. They've evolved as a human, and the objective reality ultimately wasn't the process of trying to improve the objective reality actually shaped this subjective world that the human was living in. So, have you got experience in both of those sort of worlds?
Yeah, of course, man.
Yeah.
As you know, I've coached hundreds of people, so I've seen it all from every end. And
Seen it all.
yes,
Yeah,
exactly right.
exactly. And it's like, well, how much of this objective stuff actually matters to what is the process and what the unfolding is? And if you view yourself as a powerlifting coach only for the objective stuff, well, it's very much just an on and off switch of whether or not you're good or bad at your job. But when you actually zoom out a little bit and view like your impact as a coach, your impact on the experience of training, your impact on your ability to get people to engage with health and fitness, if you want to zoom out from powerlifting just a little bit. Like all of those sort of things I think are significantly more important for the impact that we have on clients than just simply, hey, yeah, you added 10 kilos to your squat, well done. I'll see you on Monday for your 4x8s and let's go. Like it, yeah. So that's where the zoom out idea comes in. Like we shouldn't just focus on one specific thing. Try not to get stuck into the objective stuff. Like we have to view this whole thing, and that principle of zooming out, of like, let's take a higher vantage, I think is just an important thing, regardless of what we're talking about. But that's how it kind of lines up with that subjective.
I want to ask you, because you've got experience in professional sports, a very brief stint at Carlton, which we won't go into, but and you understand professional sports, you're a sports fan yourself. When I think of coaching in a professional sense, when I say professional sense, I mean a professional context, is very, very, very results based, right? Like if you are a fitness coach, for example, for an elite soccer club, like let's say you're in the English Premier League, right, where there's a very high stakes. If, for example, preseason testing, athletes get all these numbers, postseason, or like, just before this, at the end of the preseason, all the markers are static. They haven't improved. The athletes haven't improved in whatever metrics they've decided are important. It's your work is on the chopping block. Like it's very results based. Like where it sounds like when you're talking about like the work that we're doing, I guess like
I agree to that to a point, but I also disagree with that.
Okay, I'll be curious to hear what you have to say, but I very much feel like there will be people who very much see the coaching process, or there are even coaches themselves who are very elitist, I suppose, in their approach, which has its validity, where it says if your clients aren't improving, you're not doing your job as a coach. Like that's you said before about a lifter hasn't objectively improved. It's like, well, are you failing them as a coach? And like, it almost sounds like you view your role as a coach to be a bit broader than just the pure objective, like, if you're not improving, then that there's something wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah. To the first point, I think where I view sort of like, especially in elite sport, and let's just look at it as objective sort of progression. Absolutely, you could view your impact as just completely objective numbers, data, progression, whatever it needs to be. But in the exact same conversation, if you view how I view the BPS model, which is that you can't actually separate the objective reality from the subjective sort of experience. You cannot separate them. They're not these individual things that have a little bit of overlap. They are completely in the case. It is a dynamic system. Objectively, your data for a team sport might be decreasing, but at the same level, maybe there is this huge subjective influence that's changing. Leadership roles are changing, coaching strategies changing. All of these things are changing to the point where the team is winning simply by this cultural shift that is happening. And maybe there's less importance or less reliance on the strength training, the S&C work. But overall, the progression of the team's performance has improved, regardless of whether or not they've got stronger, their Nordic curl has increased or any of those sort of things. And when you look at like the rehab profession as well, like there's all these studies to try to be like you try to blame one specific muscle for not being strong enough, not being stable, and whatever the fuck narrative you want to wrap around it. But the continued sort of expression of our understanding is that it is a dynamic system of performance, of expression. And I think that is true for everything. It's like we can't boil it down to just simply the objective sort of progression of a number, of a data, of a training variable that progresses over time. Like you have to view it as this soupy mess of a dynamic system that just emerges qualities, emerges outcomes over time. I think that's a better way to look at it. So you could become a reductionist and only view the objective stuff, but I think that is missing a huge chunk of the overall conversation. Where that might differ for powerlifting is that powerlifting as a performance is by far away, like compared to all other sport performance, is as objective of a performance as you get. The training is the sport. It is purely a numbers-based thing, and you're either strong enough to lift it or you're not. There's not really any other, like, how's the team play going? Obviously, there's some tactics and strategy to load selections on a comp plan. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's you're strong enough or you're not. Like
Mhm.
that's the one answer. So I think potentially maybe in the powerlifting world that there might be a heavier bias to the objective reality of what's going on. But even still, like you can't get away from the subjective influences of the performance. Like you just can't. Classic example, a client signs up at a new gym, nothing changes with their programming, but all of a sudden they're simply just in amongst other people doing it. They feel more motivated, they feel more confident, they get a little bit of a push, and their training just progresses, even despite the fact that objectively none of the process actually changed. It's just this subjective environmental position that they're in has pushed them to
Yeah, this
yeah.
all the stuff you just talked about reminds me of a term that I use, which I call spreadsheet coaches. These are like the modern day powerlifting coach that reduce training down to purely numbers, and they almost forget that the person on the other side of their online coaching service is a human being.
Yep.
And they try to treat, and there are coaches out there that do this, that try to treat athletes as like a mechanical system where input
Computer.
numbers, like a software engineer would input script, input code, and it spits out results. And they measure volume and velocity and RPE, and everything is like totally tracked and numericized, I suppose.
Objective.
And one thing that you said in your, beforehand is you said, as part of your philosophy in navigating a lifter's mental game, you referred asking deeper questions. Oh no, you said more conversations, less forms and questionnaires.
Yeah.
More conversations, less forms. And so one thing I thought about while you were talking, that whole spitball that you just went through, was how do you measure this? Like you said, you referred to it as a soupy mess. This is a lifter is a soupy mess of variables. How do you measure it, if at all?
Yep. Yeah. So I think for context, I think what the meta conversation that we're having here is human experience is a dynamic system, and there's a couple of key sort of rules that apply to a dynamic system. So people may have heard this as dynamic systems theory, but ultimately when we think of a dynamic system, the outcome expression, whatever it might be, let's just use powerlifting, strength performance, is a result of the processing strategies of the system, the human, within reaction of the inputs. So inputs come into this system, they are processed dynamically, they all interact with each other, and then outcomes begin to emerge. There's a couple of key rules within a dynamic system. You can't force an outcome. You can't force someone to get stronger. You can't manipulate variables in a way that guarantees and forces someone to progress. As you coach and you gain experience, you realize the things that have a bigger impact. Managing volume, managing intensity, managing frequency, managing mindset, confidence, all of those sort of things. Like they're big variables, they're big levers of inputs that we can play with, but they still don't guarantee the outcome. Another key thing within a dynamic system is that no single input variable works in isolation. When you decide to change an exercise, you change the perception of their attitude to that exposure. You change the volume of that exposure. You change the intensity. You change all of it. Just simply by changing an exercise, you modify all of these other variables and the way that it's processed. So you can't force adaptations. You can't force outcomes. They emerge as a response to the inputs that come in. And no single input variable works in isolation. And in the same way, no single outcome works in isolation. You can't boil an outcome to one single decision that you made. It just doesn't work that way. That's just not what happens. It's a dynamic system. It's a soupy mess. That is great, but it then leaves, especially younger coaches, to be like, well, then what the fuck am I doing? Like, do I change this? Like, there's endless things I could change. There's endless things I could discuss. And it's like, well, we need to make it constructive in some way. So the way that I recommend coaches go through this process is your review process of has this been successful needs to have objective data, and it also has to have subjective influence. So objective stuff is very simple for coaching. Did they get stronger? Were they recovering better? Was their RPEs improving? Like all that typical stuff. Very simple to track. You
Measurable
can
stuff.
use You
Quantitative
can use
stuff.
your spreadsheet for that. You can build formulas and it will tell you. You can create a fucking arbitrary recovery number. You could do all of that stuff. Very simple. But I think the thing where people sort of miss the ball is the subjective stuff. So what are the subjective things that we need to review as to whether or not something was productive? I think the important questions are literally asking your athlete, do you think that this was a productive training block?
Love
Like
that.
that sounds simple, but
Mhm.
if somebody objectively the data tells us one story, but subjectively, if the client says, you know what, I actually think that we could have done better if this was getting their input, and obviously newer lifters, their input might not be as accurate as you want it to be, but over time in the coaching development, like just simply that one question, do you think this was a productive training block? If you did think it was productive, what do you think was most productive? If you didn't think it was productive, what do you think we need to change? What would you like to see more or less of in the next block? Getting their input, I think, is really important. Do you feel confident in the plan that we previously set? I think is another really important question,
Mm.
because you set a plan at the start of the training block, and then information and data is changing week to week to week to week. You might get 6 or 8 weeks down the track, and the client actually thinks, you know what? I know I initially said that I want to do X, Y, and Z, but I actually think this direction. More often than not, they're like, yeah, let's keep going. There's a comp coming up or whatever, and you don't have to make any changes. But they're the kind of questions that I would recommend. And then the secondary thing to that is, do not send a form. Have a conversation, because you pick up the tone. You pick up, preferably face to face, not voice message. Have a Zoom call if it's an online client. And this speaks to experience from me just with our business. Coming out of COVID, we fucking blew up. I think there was a number of input variables that happened in our system, but coming out of COVID, it was wild. We were
You're talking about
signing up
the gym, Melbourne Strength Culture.
Melbourne Strength Culture. All of our coaches got to capacity so quickly. I was pumping, everyone was pumping. We just came out, we moved gyms, we started this big social media push. Like, these are all the input variables into my dynamic system as a business, because a business is a dynamic system as well. And the outcome was rapid growth. And we started putting in all of these processes to deal with a rapid growing business. And all of those decisions were to remove some of this subjectivity of training. It was to try to get more people to engage with forms because they were quicker. We could send the form and just get the impact, change the program. We reduced our rate of communication through the week so we could handle more clients. We put time frames on when and when not, like you were to expect communication to respond. And the outcome of all of those decisions, by trying to make it more of an objective process, was more emails in my fucking inbox saying, hey, I feel like the quality's dropped. I used to get all of these fucking blah, blah, blah. Like all, and it was like, this subjective world is really important. So we've made all the changes over the last couple of years to be like, we need to keep this stuff in. Offer more phone calls, offer more chats, offer more contact, offer all of this subjective stuff to try to, because I think it is, as I said, I think it's more important than the objective world. And it's from my experience that I've gone through it. So I would recommend having more phone calls, more conversations, rather than just trying to like hide behind a form or a process or a
that anecdote.
if you feel recovered. It's like, what the fuck is this?
That anecdote of coming out of COVID, trying to put systems in, and then seeing how that kind of failed was actually going to be my next question, because you know you said you love systems, obviously in a training point of view, like the human body systems models, and all good businesses have systems, right? Like that's how businesses grow, and that's how they scale. And undoubtedly, that was the perspective you had, was, well, we're at capacity, and if we're going to grow, and if we're going to take on more clients per coach, or if we're going to bring on another coach, we need systems to unify, to standardize the service that we're providing. But then that brought its own level of problems. So like, I guess my question is like, how do you balance, like at what point, because you know, like when someone inquires with me for online coaching, I say, okay, this is what I offer. You get this, you get weekly check-in, you get a questionnaire that you get to fill in every week about your training. You send me your training videos. We have chats online. We have a monthly call. This is what's offered. But as I'm sure you'll attest to, what actually gets offered is very dynamic in the sense of some people you barely talk to, they just are machines, they move forward, you never have calls with them. Like I've got an online client who I've been coaching for 8.5 years. We've had one call in 8.5 years. And he's a freaking weapon, and he's a robot. And then I have others who want the call every more than once a month, and I have to be like, hey man, it's a bit more than what I'm willing to do, but I'm willing to bend over a little bit for you because you're a good guy and stuff. And so,
Absolutely.
but when you're running a business and you're paying staff, it's like they can't all be going out of the way for people. It's very, very tricky because you've got this interplay, which is what you're talking about the actual service, but also business considerations. And I think this is a very practical part of coaching. Is like, it's a business, you've got to make money, and if you are making decisions, yeah, you have to make decisions. There's a conflict of interest almost, right? Because some decisions are best for business from a financial point of view, where if there was a CEO that gave zero shits about fitness, but all they cared about was, is the business moving forward, they would make a decision. Whereas you as a human being, as a real coach who coaches real people, you would make a different decision, and those things might be in conflict. So, but you're wearing both hats. You are both the
Yeah.
CEO and the coach. And so I find that's one thing I find very, very challenging about drawing boundaries, about understanding how much to give and how much to bend over, and where do systems, like forms and online stuff versus this very subjective, like, hey, let's have a chat, let's catch up for a coffee, let's come to the gym 15 minutes early, and I want to actually ask you a few questions about how you're feeling. Like, I know there's no answer to this, but how do you kind of manage that?
Yeah. Um, Well, yeah, I think again, if we go back to that contextual idea of what a dynamic system is, the only way in which you can really work out whether or not the decision was correct is let it play out. Like you can't put a crystal ball in front of you and be like, well, if I flip my business strategy to X, Y, and Z, I can guarantee I can force these outcomes. It doesn't work that way. The only way that you can analyze whether or not it was productive is actually just start making those decisions and then review that process at some point in the future. So I think, again, like my autistic model brain goes straight back to like, well, what is a key principle that coaches can view these decisions with? And another one that I have that is a lens that I view information through is this idea of like top down versus bottom up sort of decision making. I view it as decision making more than anything else, where top down decision making is rigidity, it's structure, it's constraint on the system. Where bottoms up decision making is dynamic, it's reactive, it's not as
Open-ended.
planned, it's open ended. It just allows things to grow and emerge. I think if you can view training or business through this lens, but if you view your coaching process as, I have very rigid things that need to be abided by, there are certain rules that I'm not willing to break. A classic one that I recommend most coaches do is have a time of the day that you just don't respond. If it's after 6 p.m., fucking turn your WhatsApp off and don't respond. Like, I think that is a viable, very well understood, rigid rule within your communication strategy that probably needs to be, no one should be 24/7 access. No one should be fucking Sundays and all of this sort of stuff, because it just creates a shitty
And no
dynamic.
coaches
So
offer that.
yeah,
That
I
as
know.
a
I don't know
marketing
how the
thing.
fuck they open that, offer that.
I
But
think they're 3 years old. That's
but
how.
but that's just one example of like a rigid rule that you might just have in place. It's a top-down rule that you're not willing to bend within. But I think having some flexibility to some of your process is important. Like, another classic one that I think we made the error of in that period where we were just using a lot more of this like objective questionnaires and all of that was thinking that certain people hold value in doing those processes. Some people actually don't have any value in the communication. They
What do you mean?
simply want the program
Okay.
and they want to get told what to do, and they actually don't want to bother you. They don't want to feel like they're bothering you. They don't want to send you just a video because they think that you need to hit a quota of video feedback. That's your client for 8.5 years. His value with the coaching experience actually has nothing to do with what you might value as a coach.
Right.
It's simply just he wants the program and wants some support when it's needed. That's what he values. So trying to force him into your top-down structures
Mm.
creates a shitty experience for him where he feels like, I don't want to do this. Actually, you know what? This is too involved. I'm going to go and find another coach that's more kickback. Another client, though, might hold value in all of the subjective stuff. They want the conversation. They don't want to fill the format. They'll rather just have a phone call. They'd rather a 10-minute catch up than back and forth text messages all week. Like, certain people, so you have to have some sort of dynamic process that allows sort of the exchange in the service to be valuable and meet the expectations of both the coach and the client. So I think having top-down rigid rules is important, but having these bottoms-up processes that you're available to move and bend, I think, are important as well. I don't even know if that answered your question, but that's how I would view it.
Yeah, it's like there are going to always be. I mean, like, we're dealing with human beings, like, you're not dealing like, I mean, and I guess this is like the whole crux of your whole point, is that you're dealing with human beings that are moving in space and have different opinions and different backgrounds and different, there's all these differences. And if you try to, like what I always say is, if you try to fit a square through a round hole, like, you're not going to have much success, because, and if you try to funnel everyone into your machine, it's like you said, if you, the top down approach, if you try to force someone into that, it's not going to work. But at the same time, I think there is going to be some merit and value in almost using that as a filtering tool and saying, like, well, if I'm not for you, then I'm not for you. Like, you also can't bend over for everybody and say,
absolutely.
But if you've got your systems, and if my systems don't suit you, then you'll go off and find someone else, and that's probably a better fit anyway.
Absolutely, I think it will, because I think from a coaching, and at least it's been my experience, it's the ones that you pander to and change and modify and all of that, like, they're the ones that eventually you start to feel resentment around. Like, ultimately, like, you've got some lines in the sand that you're not willing to cross with certain parts of it, but as long as we're playing within the general box that we're all able to be happily sort of change and modify within, I think that's completely fair. I think I've kind of just confused myself in how I've explained that. But one last thing I do want to say to this top down bottoms up thing is that in the same way that we think that different individuals will respond differently to both constraint on a system and flexibility within the system, like, my bias from coaching and just my life experience is definitely more bottoms up flavors. Like, I like being dynamic. I like having options and moving around, and, like, I don't really like rules. When someone tells me to do something, I just have that personality of, like, well, I'm going to fucking prove you otherwise. Like, I have this sort of, like, bottoms up dynamic sort of flavor just around my life in general. So I definitely bias a lot of my decisions to that, because that's just who I am. But in the same way, you'll have different individuals that respond to different sort of things for better or worse. The same individual will also go through periods where they respond better to more top-down, structured sort of decisions, compared to, there'll be times in their life where they probably will be responding better to more bottoms-up, dynamic, reactive processes and systems as well. So having the opportunity, and I think, and that's part of this subjective review process with clients, is just asking for a bit of feedback, like, how's the coaching experience been? Like, is there, I recommend that we do this with everyone within their first training block, just at like week 2, week 3, you simply just ask, hey, we're a couple of weeks in now, how's the coaching experience? Do you want to hear from me more? Do you want to hear from me less? Do you prefer phone calls? Do you prefer the form at the end of the week? Just trying to get a little bit of that stuff to try to help the way in which you manage certain clients, I think, is important.
One thing I often say about, I mean, I don't consider myself a business guru in any sense, but, I have been self-employed basically my whole adult life, as we've discussed, don't have a real job.
You're doing a great job.
No, thank you. So one thing I often say to people is, or at least the way that I view business, is as any good student of anything, you look to who's successful. And if you look at successful businesses, they have systems, right? Like, I often say, if you go to any McDonald's in Australia, the Big Mac will come out the same. And if you are Gordon Ramsay himself and you get a job at McDonald's, you can't do things the way you want to do them. You have to do them the way McDonald's asks you to do them, because there are systems in order to create,
consistency,
uniformity from store to store. If you go to somewhere in South Melbourne, or if you go to somewhere in rural Northern Territory, it's going to be the same. Even across the world, right? The same recipe, same blah, 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 blah. That makes sense in that context, like, you walk into a McDonald's, it even looks the same. They all look the same. It's the same products. Everything is unified. The same
constant beeping from all the machines. Just
beep,
beep,
all
beep, beep.
The same 16-year-old kid that gets abused doesn't want to be there. It's all a shame. In my 10, 12 years in powerlifting, one thing I've constantly seen is failing coaching practices. It's very rare to see a coaching group succeed. Like there are many good individual coaches. There are very few very successful coaching groups. There are a few more now. Like when I think internationally, I mean, I don't know how much you pay attention, but there's like Joey Flex and his gang, the Flex training systems. There's TSG. There's reactive
Yeah.
training systems, and as you guys, So I guess the question I want to have to you is, how much importance do you have in terms of creating systems for your staff so that the service that they are offering to your broader community is uniform, versus how much of this bottoms up flexibility do they have to just like do what works for them and what works for the clients? Like, how do you, I guess, quality control that the staff are doing things correctly and doing things right? And how do, if there are no rules? It's not that there are
Yeah,
none,
well,
but
there are rules. I think
yeah,
if you use bottoms up decisions, there's still rules to within bottoms up
yeah,
decisions.
sure,
Like
sure.
there's still constraints and structures that you're working within. It's just that you're more open to being dynamic with it. The thing that I think we've done really, really well over the years, because I think this is twofold. I think there's parts that we've been super successful at, and there's also parts that I think that I have fundamentally probably not met my own expectations, which has then flowed into the expectations of clients and their experiences. But the things that we've done really well is we all operate, and we have always operated from the same base set of principles with decision making. If you were to ask, and this started on the gym floor with how we just simply communicate cues to clients, because the way our gym works is it's semi-private. There's coaches littered around the week, but depending on what day you come, you get a different coach that's managing you. It's not the same
Same as
coach
us.
every time. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So it was really important for me when setting up the business structure and the processes, was that we all use the similar language. We all try to communicate things in the same way, so that when a new client comes in, if they get the same sort of communication and language that they would get from another coach on a Tuesday than if they came on a Friday morning and they saw me instead of Charlie or whatever. The way we communicate, the coaching, the objective coaching process in the gym was standardized to the point where we use similar cues, we use similar context, we use similar strategies to get people there. That then just sort of extrapolated to our coaching process and the principles that we use for decision making. RPE is the central point of our intensity strategy, because it aligns with all of my biases to this bottoms up thing, but I think it goes further than that. Our understanding of how to manage programs when we're managing niggles. We have the same process that we go through. We look at this variable first, we look at this, and then we look at this. Like all of those like processes of coaching are standardized, and they're all central to key principles. So it's just that within that extrapolation, and I think one of your questions on the thing was this idea of individualization.
yeah.
The way I don't view, people view individualization as a principle of training. I disagree with that. I don't think it's a principle of training. I don't think individualization is something that you inform decisions with. I think that individualized strategies are the expression of applying principles to the individual, if that makes sense.
Can you repeat that? Say that one more time.
So the way I view it, like, because again, autistic brain, I like a visual. I view the tree growing, the tree itself that's growing is the individualized expression. The input principle decisions that allow this tree to grow are the actual dials and things that we manage and manipulate. To me, there's only three principles of training. There's load management, and that is incredibly deep. So deep, so complicated, so complex, it's not funny. But load management is the key principle of training management. The second one is specificity. You work towards goals or you work away from goals. And physiological, psychological outcomes. The third one is just phase potentiation, which is simply just we can structure training, and if we do it well, it compounds positively over time. If we do it poorly, it compounds negatively over time. But the decisions that we make have the potential to compound in either direction. To me, that they are the three principles. From those three principles, when they're applied to an individual, we create an individualized plan. There's no decision at any point that's like, this person is an individual, this person needs a specific thing. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't compute in my brain as that way. I view it as this individualization emerges from these base principles. So if you've got 10 different coaches that are all operating within these base principles, you get individualized strategies that emerge from it. And
Some people might say that. sorry to interrupt you. Some people might say that individualization is, a very simple example of the classic view of individualization is, okay, I've got this client in front of me who's, 6'1" and has a 6'4" wingspan, and benching once a week is as much as they can do because their shoulders will hurt. Whereas I've got someone else who's 5'5" with a 5'2" wingspan, and they bench 5 days a week and their shoulders are fine. And if I tried to swap their programs, then both of them would get injured, or just would, one of them would get injured and the other one would make no
productive.
Yeah. And that's an example of individualization. It's giving two different people a different program because they are individual people. Is that not?
See, I don't view that as individualization. I view that as load management.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. That you just put it under a different category.
Yeah, they're not. It's not. Again, at no point is the decision led by the idea of this person is an individual. I need to manage this individually. The decision is this person isn't responding to the load. I need to change the load. It's a load management principle that underpins it. The individualized strategy expresses from
is a result of.
And that's why I don't view individualization as a principle. People might think that this is semantics and all of that, but I hold a lot of value in like how you define things and how you think about things, because I think once you get really strong on your ideas, it removes all of the confusion around like what am I actually available? What are my available inputs to manage in this system? Because there really isn't that many when we think about the objectivity of the training process. I think that was another answer that I put in your question there. The objectivity of strength training is very, very simple. It's not a difficult thing to understand. It's the difficulty in long-term strength progression is all of the subjective stuff that rides with keeping people engaged, keeping people like motivated to train, and like that is the more difficult task. Just progressing somebody's strength, progressing a robotic strength I don't think is that difficult at all. But that we're in a whole another side of the conversation there. So back to where I think the things that we've done successful as a gym, as a coaching brand, is that we all ride through these same principles. Our decision making is very much constrained to the base principles. And that gives me confidence that when a new client signs up, I know that they're getting the Big Mac. The Big Mac might have a couple of different flavors for them, but the crux of the Big Mac is very much the same. I could transition that program over to another coach, and 99% of those decisions we all would have made, more than likely. So that's one thing I think we've done really well. One thing that I think we've done poorly, though, over the years is not standardizing more of the actual service of coaching. And this would come down to things like some people across the years, some of our coaches have put more importance on like Loom recordings compared to other people who have put a bit more on voice note, like little like small things around that. I kind of wish a couple of years ago I made the decision to be like, this is the base thing that we do, and preferably try not to move too far away from this. I think in that period of aggressive growth, we all kind of were just like making subtle adjustments to the way in which we actually coach. And then that kind of just extrapolated to like, whoa, Didier does this. He's a bit more email dominant. Charlie's doing a bit more voicemail dominant. I'm doing more of this Loom dominant thing. And I kind of wish I did standardize that a little bit more.
It's hard to say though, because if you standardize it more, maybe the outcomes might have been worse. You know, like then all of a sudden the coaches feel like they're pigeonholed into a thing they don't like doing, and then the outcomes are worse. So it kind of goes both ways. Yeah, I want to ask you. You've talked a lot about these lenses, like the way that you view the human body and training and movement, as well as like your bottoms up approach. The meaty question I want to ask you is, how does that manifest in your coaching practice? Like what does it actually mean for if someone signs up for coaching from Jamie Smith versus they sign up for coaching from someone else? How does that actually manifest? Like, what are the actual consequences of the way that you view things, and how has that changed over the years? Maybe you used to offer, you just talked about the Looms thing versus emails versus whatever. You've talked about more conversations, less forms. What does your service even look like? Like if someone signs up for coaching from you, like what does that actually entail?
Yeah, and I think this is this is when you view the deeper, and like we kind of got to this idea with like the nihilism of it doesn't matter where the hip's at if they're not coming to training. Like eventually you get to this nihilistic sort of view where none of it actually matters. It's all To be honest, if I was to describe my online coaching or my coaching service, it's the same as everyone else's coaching service. It's you get a program, we have some conversations, you send some videos, and we go through that process. From the client's perspective, I don't think it's any different than it might just lean into a little bit more of the subjectivity stuff. There might just be a little bit more of, I'm actually looking for their input. I want their input into exercise selections, into volume prescriptions, into intensity, into RPE strategies, whatever it might be. Like I think I probably am a little bit more in that world where I'm actively seeking for input from the client, sorry, where I think other coaches might be a little bit more top down in when people sign up, it's like, oh, they're kind of fitting to my system of programming, or they're fitting to my strategy of progression, or whatever it might be. I think that is probably the biggest differentiation between the way that I or we do things compared to what I think some other coaches would do. But I think the meat and potatoes of the coaching is, from the client's perspective anyway, it would be the exact same. I get a program, I can chat with my coach, I get some support, I get some technique help and all of that. I think it's just the decisions that build our programs might just have some different flavor. But from a client's perspective, it might actually just look exactly the same. Yeah.
It's funny how like there are many ways to skin a cat, right? And I guess, you know, your systems and models and the way of viewing things are very robust and very, very logical. But I'm sure there are other coaches that have completely different opinions and different views and different ways about doing things, but they probably arrive at very similar
Absolutely.
Conclusions or results or the way they actually carry out their practice. Maybe
how it actually ends up looking is probably going to be 95% of the same stuff anyway. Yeah, and again, like I truly believe that, because if we just view it through the lens of the objective and the subjective, the objectivity of programming is actually really easy. It's not a difficult thing to manage somebody's volume across a training block, to manage intensity, to make the decision to drop intensity because recovery is not happening, or make the decision to progress volume. Most coaches will end up in the same ballpark. Where I think the biggest importance, the biggest progression that coaches need to make is all of the subjective stuff that aligns the individual to those decisions. And that's where the changes, I think, are more present. And this
I think like a lot of younger coaches try to logic their way through things, like we were saying before about it's treating it as a very mechanical system. Like if someone's experiencing pain, they will try to like logic their way through and actually rationalize their way through, which has its validity.
Definitely.
But as you're saying, that there's this big subjective kind of impossible thing to measure. One thing that I've become increasingly conscious of over the last couple of years, not just because of coaching, but just the way that I'm, viewing the world and my other hobbies and stuff. One thing I've grown passionately about is this idea of intuition, and like what even is intuition. And like you've heard of these like firemen are in a burning house and they're doing their best to bring down the fire, and then one of them just has a sense, hey man, this place is about to fucking collapse, let's get out of here. And 10 seconds later, the whole thing collapses. How did you know it was going to collapse? I don't know. I just had a sense. And I think one thing that coaches develop over many, many years of doing all of this kind of stuff that we're talking about is you do develop a bit of intuition. Like, the right questions to ask, you can tell when someone's like burnt out before they even know. And you can tell that they need a change or they don't need a change. Or, I think this subjective stuff, you haven't used the word, but that's what I'm gathering is what you're describing. It's intuitive. You just get a sense of, and that's why these conversations are important. You need to have a conversation because you need to hear the tone and the way they say things and like what they're going for. It's like, you can't measure, those are immeasurables, but as pattern recognition machines, we're able to recognize those patterns and put meaning to them.
I think I view them as red flags. Clients start waving red flags. They start as little red flags, but eventually they turn into a big red flag, which is an email in your inbox saying I'm done. But there's always little red flags, and in the online space, they're a little bit harder to pick up than in the in-person space. But a classic red flag is they just start missing sessions. Like, literally, they were training 4 days a week for 6 months. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I didn't see you on Thursday. Like, where were you? Oh, yeah, I just had this other thing. And then the next week rolls around, you don't see them again. And like all of a sudden, like that's a little red flag. They're not prioritizing or they're not engaging with the thing. Like as soon as you start picking up some of those little red flags, I think it's important to then have that conversation. But that might be some of the little triggers that a newer coach might look for. Another classic one is not filling in their program. If they go through a period where they fill in their program all the time, and then all of a sudden you're looking at their data and it's like, hang on, how come you didn't fill out set 4? It's like, just fucking, or they reduce the frequency of sending videos, or they're not as open to communicating, and all of those things. Like, they're little red flags that you might be able to perceive. But absolutely, I definitely agree with, like, intuition is huge. It's the subjectivity. I'm just huge. I'm bullish on subjectivity.
Yeah, that's how you filter through the subjectivity.
Yeah.
Because, I asked you before about how do you even measure all this? And I guess maybe the answer is you don't measure it. You just sense it. And I think it's a bit of a cop out of an answer because, if you're a 22-year-old coach that wants to learn, you just want to be told what's the answers. But it's like, dude, there is no answers. You just need time in the game. And like,
Yeah,
you're just young.
10 more years of coaching. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to develop some intuition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask you about these unpopular opinions that you have, or these contrarian beliefs. And you've told me that you think that powerlifting is actually quite easy. The skills are very easy. And that the difficulty in powerlifting, which you just mentioned actually just then, is that the difficulty in powerlifting is just keeping people engaged, which I actually don't think is that contrarian. But you're saying the objectivity of powerlifting is very simple to understand, which is why I want to bring it up. It's a nice segue because you just mentioned that.
Yeah, I think again, if you zoom out of a hyper focus on just powerlifting as a sport, if you just zoom out to sports in general, I think powerlifting is one of the easiest to control input variables. Like, there's no direct competition. The environment is completely controlled.
It's very closed a skill.
It's very close. It's all a closed skill loop. It's a finite sort of expression. It's not very reactive.
I think one thing you want to say is use the same bar on the platform as you do in the gym. Like,
exactly. All of the input variables are so easily managed and controlled that objectively it's not that difficult to create a progressive program for somebody. The difficulty lies in getting a client to engage with this mundane, boring expression. Not everyone finds it boring, but over time, it is the exact same thing. The sport is the training is the sport, the sessions are long and tiresome and all of that. Like, that is a more difficult process than simply building the objective program. And I think maybe it's not like super contrarian, but I think that a lot of, at least from in the social media world, a lot of the conversation around like long-term development and stuff is like, how do I manage volume over time? How do I manage intensity over time? Like, yeah, those things are really important, but I just don't think that they are the crux of long-term. Like, I'll ask you a follow-up question. What makes the strongest people you've ever been around? Like, what is the quality that allows that to be expressed?
What do you mean by quality? Like, as in,
like, what is the base sort of characteristics of somebody that engages with powerlifting for a long time to allow them to see these huge, like, the strongest people you've ever been around? What are the base qualities that you think underpin all of that?
It's funny because the first answer that comes to my mind is not a single answer. It's actually what we've been talking about. If it's a interplay of things. So, for example, like, I mean, the obvious answer is like, time and an obsession. Like, you've got to be obsessed with this thing. But that interplays with other things, because lifters who see early success, like maybe they're genetically gifted or whatever, that feeds like their ego generally. That feeds like some sort of like self-gratification, personal acceptance in community, blah blah blah, which makes them more obsessed. I know I experienced that as a junior. Like, I got a lot of accolades, and that felt good, and that drove me to train harder, to then, it's like a positive feedback loop, to then seek out more of that. And then so I became obsessed with it, because I was like, this is sick and I want to keep doing it. Whereas it's almost like a chain reaction of like, as good things happened, you get more obsessed with trying to make those good things continue to happen. Whereas if someone like experiences early disappointment, they're not genetically gifted, they're less likely to fall into this pattern of being obsessed and training harder and wanting to do 6 days a week and wanting to look up every program ever and learn everything they can. Like, so I think of like the top lifters, they all went through that. Like, I've met many of the top lifters in the world, and they don't have this balance that you and even I have now of like, like, even you referred to nihilism. I very much relate to that, because I very much feel like, in some senses, nothing matters at all. It's who cares? Like, if it matters to you, then like, okay, it matters to me. Like, I want to help you, but also, yeah, like, really, whereas top
Is it that
lifters
important?
really
Yeah.
think it matters. They think it's the best thing and it's the only thing that is important in their life. And yeah, I mean, I think that's my answer to your question. I don't know if that's kind of what you're expecting or like what you
No,
wanted to.
absolutely it is. It's there's all these different everybody, every single person is going to have a different experience as to what allows them to progress those things. I think the base quality underneath it all is that they probably at some level just enjoy the thing. Like
Yeah,
like I think that's probably the commonality and how they find that enjoyment. Some people find it from the challenge of the process. Some people find it from the maybe the accolades that they get or the social sort of the community vibe of like how they find that enjoyment is but there has to be this base level. I don't know anybody that's consistently just powerlifting that fucking hates every aspect of it and it's like ruining their day. Like it's not there. So I think like this enjoyment is definitely a big part of it, but that expression of that long-term growth to so many different people is so many different subjective drivers. I think that's the key thing that I was kind of get from that. I don't think any single person will turn around and say, I am the strongest person in the world because I do this strategy of programming.
yeah, yeah,
They're all going to say, I work harder, I do this, I'm passionate, this is all I care about. All of these different subjective feeders into their system allows them to express elite performance. None of them are going to turn around and say, I am this strong because I employ this method.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's
Right.
just the objectivity is so far removed from, or the objective training program is so far removed from what makes long-term success in powerlifting.
I think like when you're young, you look for those like that secret sauce or the magic formula or the magic program. Like, what is it? You know, when I remember when velocity-based training started becoming a thing, and people were like, "Whoa, this is the future. This is the thing that I'm missing from my training." And like, you know, everybody looks up like, what's the best training method and how do I, you know, achieve this? There's two things I want to say about it. The first is, um, based on like what you're just saying, and we were talking about this earlier, and I forgot to mention it was like you know you often see these like social media posts, and I get it. Like I'm not bashing on these posts, but you often see these social media posts of like coaches say, you know, with their case studies, and they say I've got this client Jamie who was. You know, his squat was stalled for 6 months. And what I noticed was that his knees were coming in. So I gave him this specific exercise and then that fixed everything. And 3 months later, he had a 20 kilo squat PR. And so this could be the problem for you. So go and do this exercise that I've invented and it's the best exercise ever. So it's like this whole kind of like funneling down the answer to like one thing, which we know is ridiculous, but also I get it. You know, you're trying to grow your business and you want to, and maybe this person is being genuine, like genuinely thought that was what fixed things. And, you know, you've got this like very narrow lens. So I don't know if it's through ignorance or if it's just through like maybe like business savviness that you think that this is the kind of message that you want to send out. So that's one thing. But the other thing, the other anecdote I want to share is I remember years ago, like I'm talking years and years ago, Ed Cohen, one of the greatest powerlifters of all time, if not considered the
Shout out.
GOAT. I think he was doing a seminar or workshop and someone asked him about the time that he squatted. Well, it wasn't, but most he ever squatted. I think he squatted like 1,050 or 1,030. And
Something
they asked
stupid.
him what his program looked like, or what did his prep look like in the lead up to his lifetime squat PR. And what he said was he did 1 day a week. I think this is what I remember, but I'm very sure. He said he did 1 day a week heavy, linear progression, the classic 12-week, you know, sixes, fives, fours, threes, singles. And the other day a week was a speed day. I think it was like 6 sets of 3 or something at 50%. And the speed day was the same weight the whole program. Like it didn't progress. It was just like he did 6x3 at 500 pounds, for example, every Thursday for 12 weeks. And the general sentiment that I got was people were like, what's the word? Disappointed
Let
because they
down.
wanted a more
Double let
complicated
down.
answer. Like they wanted they're like, it can't be that simple. Like you couldn't have just done 2 squat days a week, one speed, one progressive overload, and then you squatted 1,000 pounds. Like there's no way. Like there had almost like as if there had to be something more, and they didn't. Like people were dissatisfied. They wanted a more like secret answer, I suppose. But like I
Yeah,
remember
they
that
wanted
really
a
like
reason as to why they're not squatting 1,050 pounds. They're looking for that. They're like, well,
right.
what's Ed doing that I'm not? No, he's just fucking training. He's just probably just trains harder than you, and there's this huge genetic underlie that he's just going to be stronger than fucking everyone else in the room. Bad luck. Like, welcome to reality.
And I
Yeah.
think it's like I've had those experiences where I've like heard the stories like this, and I think those actual anecdotes have shaped my coaching practice a lot because for a long time I was looking for all these answers and trying to understand everything about load management and understanding everything about programming and adaptation and exercise variations and blah 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 blah. And that's all has value and merit. And like any good coach worth their salt, worth their weight and worth their weight and worth their salt will understand those things and know how to manipulate programs for the individual and blah blah blah. All of that stuff is important. But then when you boil it all down, it's as simple as just get your training done and move forward. Like, I kind of like to and fro between training is very complicated and you need to know a lot versus it's very simple and you don't need to know a lot.
So I have I'm gonna I have an autistic analogy that I think makes this whole conversation easier for newer coaches to understand. Productive training. So what we know to drive outcomes over time is very well understood. And it really is just boiled down to train hard consistently. The training hard part is the programming and getting people to engage with it. The consistency is just time over time. And the way I view this idea of productive training is it's a target. It's a dartboard. Optimization, trying to find a specific answer, trying to find the specific reason, trying to manipulate the specific variable, trying to find the perfect setup, the perfect program, and all of that is trying to hit the dartboard with a sniper rifle. You've got one, you think you've got one shot, you think you've got one answer, you think you've got one thing to hit that productive training target. Where in reality, we're standing maybe 5 meters from the board and we're shooting a shotgun. We are, if we just align the program, the general rules of programming, the volume, intensity, and frequency, if we just align that program to the target and pull the trigger, we're hitting it. It's going to get hit. It might not be the most productive fucking splat possible, but we actually don't control the way in which these pellets come out. They kind of just move in the direction and hit the board. And I think over time, what coaches need to understand is we can definitely hit the board with a sniper rifle, no doubt about it. But is that going to be the same answer every time? Is it always going to be the truth? It's probably not. We probably need to assume this idea of we're just shooting the shotgun. If we align the objective stuff in the direction, we'll hit it. And then the way I think about it is the subjectivity, the individualization presents it, the subtle little changes in just sort of where we're pointing the barrel. The crux of it is just training hard over time, getting the shotgun in the direction. The small adjustments are just that. They're small little methods that slightly change it, but we're still just fucking blasting this thing. And very rarely is a program set up that it's not hitting the target. Look at all the templates that have worked for but decades. 5x5 is in the fucking, it's hitting the target. It might not hit the target perfectly all the time, but for most people, the 5x5 method is going to that dartboard's going to get hammered over time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the analogy. It's like we're not sniping. We're not fucking. It doesn't have to be perfect every time. We just fucking shoot the thing in the right direction. And
yeah, like those minor details are minor for a reason.
They're minor. They're small rocks.
Yeah, I want to round things out. It's been a pretty good conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot. Definitely, like even hearing the way that you've like worded some things have like cemented even ideas that I've already had. But like one thing that really stood out to me was like the hardware software thing, like referring to the human body as having hardware and software. Like I never heard it worded like that. Something that I probably haven't thought about consciously, but I really liked. But I do want to go back to one little thing and share another point that connected the dot for me was I've always referred to the athlete as a dynamic system. It's not a fixed system. And when a lifter is like struggling, like let's say a certain lift is stalled, a common strategy I think a lot of coaches will do is go back through their programs and find out what's worked in the past. And they'll say, oh, when we ran, bench 3 days a week and one of those days was a floor press, their bench blew up. And so they think that if they do something similar again or do the same thing again, it might work. And my answer to that is like, well, they're not the same athlete they were now as they were when they did that because they've already done that. Like by having done that program, they are now not the same athlete, or like they'll do a prep, the prep went successfully, so they run the same prep again.
Yep.
And it's like, if the only logic you have for running the same prep again is that it worked, the last 12-week worked, so it should work again. I think that's just so flawed because they're not the same athlete. By having done the 12 weeks, they're actually a different athlete. They're also 12 weeks older. It's also now spring and not summer. It's also, everything is changing. And so
I'm going to say Chinese. There's a proverb. I want to say Chinese, but about the man at the river. Have you heard
okay,
that one?
no,
That a man goes to a river on one day, he then leaves, and he comes back the next day. He's a new man, and the river is a new river because the water has passed, the rocks have moved, the sand
it's a
has
different
moved.
river.
He's gone. It's a different river, even though it's the next day. He's a new man because he's gone and found
It's a different
experiences and
person.
come back to the exact same spot, to the exact same point, and he's looking at the same river. But he's not the same and the river's not the same. I've butchered the proverb, but the idea is very much exactly what you're saying, is that just simply by going through the process, it is a different system, both for you and the client. You're a different coach, they're a different client. The way you communicate is different. There is, in the BPS model, so the BPS model got challenged. It was first sort of like put into research in 1979 by a guy called George Engel, who looked at the traditional biomedicine model of that when there's a disease in the system, there is a specific objective structural reason for the disease. And we
Sure.
treat the disease with medication, we treat the disease objectively. He then was like, well, there's all this like psychology field that talks about beliefs and motives and all of this that has been propagating since the 1800s that hasn't been brought into medicine. I think we need to shape and build this better idea of diseased states emerge from BPS variables, biological, psychological, and social. He presented it in the Venn diagram idea that these things, they have an interplay, but in some way they can still be viewed as independent variables, so that you can observe and analyze the biology independent of the psychology and the social, which is ultimately a reductionist view because they are so incredibly entwined. I read a paper in 2019 called The Inactive Approach to Pain, which challenged the BPS, not the ideas of the BPS model, just simply the way in which it's presented and communicated. And they challenged the idea of the Venn diagram. And they said it shouldn't be viewed in this way. It should be viewed as a dynamic bubble that is engaging with a varied environment. And the bubble is the person, and it's always encased within the environment. And that person going through experiences in life is leading that new process with an expectation of what is to happen. So the expectation for a client is that this has worked in the past, so it's going to work again. Just simply that belief might be enough to shape the outcome positively. And then conversely, what might happen, dynamic systems, is they have that belief and it doesn't get achieved. The expectation is not met. And then all of a sudden they find themselves in well, why didn't it work? It worked last time. What's wrong? And all of those sort of things. So you have to be careful how you communicate the expectation of something, and then also how you attach, the technical term is the attribution as to why the thing happened. Because you can't attribute the strength progression to one input variable. We're coming back to the same idea. You can't attribute the progression you had simply to the floor press. The attribution needs to be the entire process of all of the things that were happening productively to see and shape that outcome. It gets a little tricky.
You said that this was a lesson that you learned the hard way, was like not prioritizing clients' expectations. It's actually something you mentioned.
Yeah, you have to listen to the expectation. And my bias as a coach, when a client comes to me and says, I have a feeling that I really want to run sets of 5 on my squats. I love sets of 5. Day one of the program is fucking sets of 5 on squats, because if they believe it, that's half the fucking battle.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be like, actually, I know that you think that, but I think it's going to be this. Fucking who am I to think that something else is going to be better? Like, lean into their beliefs, obviously, as long as it's not like a destructive sort of thing. But I like leaning into that stuff. If someone's like, hey, I fucking love doing pec flies before my bench press. All right, let's run some pec flies before your bench press. I don't care. Like, let's just see how it goes, and then review the process, and it might work, it might not. But if those beliefs and those expectations are there, I lean into them a little bit. That's at least my view of it. But there are some ideas within the BPS sort of evolution that probably fit to that idea.
Yeah, I think like leaning into like the opinions of your clients, you obviously gets that buy-in, but I think I feel like, tell me what you think of this. There also has to be a healthy amount of pushback, because when you push back occasionally, then the times that you don't push back, it almost increases the buy-in. Like if they say, hey, I really want to do fives, and you say, look, I appreciate that. I think in the context of where you are with your next comp, I really want to be doing eights on squat, and I want to focus on lower reps on your high bar, for, I don't know, whatever bullshit explanation you want to have. You know, your clients respect you. Like they look up to you. There's a reason why they picked you as a coach.
Yep.
So when you push back a little bit, they're like, okay, if you think that's right, coach, and I believe you. And then next time when they have their own suggestion, and if you actually agree with them, it almost like multiplies their own belief. They're like, oh, well, if coach thinks it's right, then it must be right. Then I'm fucking onto something here, and they feel really good about it. So they're almost like you actually earn more respect by having a healthy amount of pushback, I would say.
I would agree with that, absolutely. And I think if we were to just tie that idea back to one of the other things that we chatted about, that is ultimately a top-down versus bottom-up sort of decision, is adding, from a coach's perspective, adding rigidity definitely can have I've just lost my camera. My battery's exhausted. Let me switch my, we were just saying that we just had a camera error, but the top-down, bottoms-up idea. Top-down rigidity, fixed sort of constraint and construct, definitely creates it can create a confidence in the direction that the process is going through. And I think the best place to think about this, obviously, like your decisions or the context that you just outlined, is for somebody that you might have built some experience with. So you're going through the process. There's certain times where you're creating the rigidity and they're aligning with that, and then there's other times where you offer a bit of flexibility and lean into their decisions, and if you have a good happy interplay of both of those, it ultimately probably is more productive long term, which is definitely something that I agree with, is that you shouldn't just fix everything all the time. There should be times where it's more dynamic. There should be times where it's more coach led. Like there should be that give and take. I think it's really important though, in like onboarding newer clients, I think having sort of confidence in your initial plan, I think is important initially. Like put yourself in a client's perspective. If a client signs up to you and day one, you're just like, hey, what do you want to do? Well, let's the fucking, and it's just like, well, why the fuck am I hiring you? Like I'm hiring you because you got some answers. Like you tell me.
You've got some expertise, yeah.
Yeah, so I think at the start of it, there's probably going to be a little bit more of this top-down sort of like coach-led decision-making. But I think over time, as you build experience with clients and stuff, you realize that, well, their input is important. There's times where I should probably lean into it a little bit more. But there's also times where I'm like, actually, you know what? That's a great idea, but I think this right now is going to be significantly better from you. Like use a context or explain it from someone that you've had experience with or whatever, so that they can get the buy-in for that. But again, I think a lot of this stuff, one of the key lenses is just this like top-down rigidity, rules, bottoms up sort of flexibility, openness, dynamic. I think, yeah. So I would agree with that 100%.
I asked you earlier about like, how does your lenses, these lenses that you described and your views on these things, how does this manifest in your coaching practice? And I think this is the answer, right?
It's the answer right there.
This is the answer of how it manifests. It's knowing when to be more rigid, when to be more dynamic and flexible, when to lean more into a psychosocial kind of solution. Someone's not improving very well and your intuition tells you that something's going on in their personal life, and then you realize, like there have been instances where I've got a very motivated athlete, like externally motivated. They tell you they want to do this thing. They want to train 4 days a week. They want to go to nationals, whatever it is. And then my intuition, and not, parts intuition, parts what they're telling me as well, I can see lots going on for them. And I say, listen, man, for the next 5 weeks, for this next 5 week block, we're going down to 3 days a week. And I know you're going to push back and say you want to do 4, but just trust me on this. I think 3 is going to be better because of this. I think, and this is what I'll often say to people. I'll say, doing a 3 day week program will free up an hour and a half of your week. Use that hour and a half. Don't just let it wait. Don't let it just disappear into the ether. Use that hour and a half to spend with your wife, to go for a walk, to play video games that you haven't been able to play, or to read a book that you've been wanting to read. Like, don't waste it. Actually use it in a way that feels good for you. And we can go back to 4 days in the future. But I really think the next, month, you'll benefit a lot from going down to 3 days. And then, you get a bit of pushback, but a month later, like, oh my God, I'm so grateful that you did that. Like, I think that was actually really useful. I want to keep doing 3 days a week, maybe. I don't know, whatever it might be.
Whatever
But it's
it's
like,
going
I
to be.
think that's how it manifests. It's like this whole kind of like broader approach is it's not a mechanical, like, if this, then that. If stressed, add a decreased volume. If, it's not a form, it's not a spreadsheet formula. It's a vibe. And I think coaches and clients don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that as vibes. Like I had someone say, well, how do you know how many days a week to give me on this? I'm like, I don't know, man, just vibes.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and I think vibe coaching actually is you can't start vibe coaching. Like on day one as a PT, you
You
don't
need,
vibe coach, but,
yeah,
but in time you develop that intuition and those vibes. Okay. We really should wrap up, but there is one last thing I wanted to mention because you mentioned about in a medical context, the biopsychosocial approach and you apply medicine to someone who's sick and blah, 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 blah. Um, these days there's this huge, well, not just these days, but there's this growing interest in step count. Right. And this is just like this is so random. This isn't related, but it is related. I just want to share this
yeah,
rant of
yeah.
mine. There's this growing interest in step count. You're getting your 10K steps, getting your 12K steps. And it's one of maybe it's a contrarian belief. I don't know that not all steps are made equal. And
Yep.
sometimes people will artificially improve or increase their step count by punching out 45 minutes on a treadmill or by the walking pad at the desk. I don't know what your opinion is on walking pad on desk. I personally hate them. I think they're stupid, and I'll
Yeah.
explain why. Because when you look at research and data that suggests that people that get more steps are healthier and leaner and stuff, that's not saying that the steps themselves are what led to people
You
being
cause it.
happier. It's the people that are getting more steps in. They're people that are walking to work, and on the walk to work, they walk past the dog that they pet, and then they see their neighbor, and they have a 2-minute chat, and then they stop while they're on the way to work. They stop into the supermarket to buy a drink, and they continue walking. And like those are actually like that. It's not the steps on their own. You're not attributing it to pure numbers.
Process.
It's the consequence of like how that actually interplays with your life. And so when people say like, I want to get more steps in and they just like mechanically walk around in circles or they just like walk on their walking pad at work, I'm like, no, like those steps aren't the same as the steps that you would get if you got up and went for a walk to go get a coffee in the morning. Cause that 4,000 step, journey to go get a coffee, you're getting light in your eyes. And again, you're walking past your neighbor and you're getting fresh air. And it's like, they're just not the same. But when you're a reductionist and you reduce it down to people who get 12,000 steps per day have 33% better health outcomes than people that get 8,000 steps a day, it's very easy to think, well, it's clearly the steps,
It's
but
the
it's
fourth.
no, it's a much broader kind of thing, and like I think that's what people forget. So I think that's how it manifests in my coaching practice as well. It's like I try to help people realize, whoa, like you're not just a machine with inputs. You actually are. Like it's a lot more complicated than that, but it's also very simple. But it's also very
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah. And I think like I 100% agree with all that. And I think like circling back to the very start of like some of the initial things that we chatted about with like why like my education process, like I fundamentally think that the objectivity of coaching is nihilistic. Like I just don't see any of this having that much of importance. Like I so much more lean into the subjectivity of it. For newer coaches, they can feel that because it's such like it's not a rigid sort of decision making process. It is like it's a fluid it's jelly. Like we're surrounded by jelly. It's like there's no rigid like wall. Don't do this.
Yeah.
It's all just like there's no real constraint to the decisions. I think for new coaches, if you've got to this point of this conversation, I think if you feel like you're searching for the answers, if you feel like you're searching for the perfect method, if you feel like somebody has an answer that is going to completely change the way that your business runs, the way that your outcomes with clients presents, or any of those sort of things, from my experience, you don't have a good enough grasp of the underlying just principle-based ideas and processes. Because once you learn these base level things, and there's not that many to learn, once you learn these like couple of key framing ideas, couple of key programming principles, all of these decisions just open up and you'll see it for what it actually is. If you zoom in too hard and try to find an answer and all of that, you're probably missing a lot of these just structural sort of things that actually make the progression possible. And that's what I'm trying to do with my education stuff, is like highlight the the framework of coaching rather than highlighting the individual beam that is. And it's like those things don't actually matter. It's this overall like structure that you've built and stuff. One of the things, this might just wrap the conversation. Like I use ChatGPT a lot for my ideas, but not so much in like, hey, teach me this thing. It's like, this is how I frame X, Y, and Z. And I've had fucking detailed conversations with it. Like, this is how I frame X, Y, and Z. This is the context I use. This is the analogy that I like to use. This is the visual representation that I use. How can I better communicate this to a newer coach to see the value in these ideas? Because I sometimes feel that my ideas are very esoteric. They're very zoomed out. They're very like vantage the whole thing. Like they're very like there's not like
from maybe the reality of an
the
individual
actual decision that you make. And I sometimes feel that some coaches get lost in my ideas simply by nature of that's my strategy. And I've been trying to use ChatGPT to better align for newer coaches that are coming in on board to better align my ideas to practical use case scenarios. And it basically was like, you just need an abundance of contextualized case studies to like describe like a decision that most coaches would make, but then like link it to this is the BPS flavor that's coming in. This is the top down flavor that's coming in. So even this conversation here has like helped me just be like your context, your idea, like all of that stuff really helps me. And it's like, so I've really enjoyed this. This has been really good. And I'm glad that some of the ideas have maybe changed your little vantage a little bit. That's cool.
No, absolutely. Like I've been a long time, obviously, fan of your work, but I've never worked with you directly and done any of your kind of like courses as much as I really should. But it's been great to hear things like straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Give us if there's anyone listening at this point, I'd be very impressed. But the quick wrap up of where people can find you and what projects you're working on. So you've got your training model. Have you got any intakes coming up that people want to get into ASAP or anything like that?
Yeah. So just. I think the best place is just Instagram, obviously. You can just see everything that's happening and some of the behind the scenes stuff. Just by nature of some personal things that are going on this year, I'm not doing any more like structured intakes, but I have built and I have an ongoing sort of like group mentorship that anyone can just sort of jump into. It's called the Applied Mentorship. It has it will have two weekly calls. Currently it's only got one weekly call, but there's a whole bunch of like onboarding content under unpacking these principal ideas for both programming and movement. So you can start with that and get up to speed with some of these ideas and some of this key context. And then there's just a whole bunch of just like pre-recorded content, ideas, case studies, and all of those sort of things. And then There's obviously the live calls as well. So if you are interested and want to get involved, I would recommend the Applied Mentorship, or just check out the website because there's a whole bunch of different things on there. So,
and I'll leave links to all of that stuff in the show notes, and people find you very easily. And dare I say, considering this is very early in practical powerlifting, most people who are listening to this are already followers of you or I, so it won't be very too hard to find all that kind of stuff. Right. Mate, thanks for your time. It was obviously a long one, but I feel like we could go for another hour and a half, but at some point we do have to call it. So I appreciate your time, mate. And yeah, thanks a lot.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much.